When I first came to this country, the big thing that was going on was a lot of the textile mills were going out of business because a lot of the textile manufacturing was going into Asian countries. 20 years later, a lot of those textile mills were back here in the United States, in South Carolina, because technology had caught up and they were able to produce textile much more efficiently than the Asian country. Take the automobile industry, for example. A lot of the automobiles, like even the Hyundais and BMWs of the world, are made here in the United States. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is to recognize this as a global economy.
Now, IIT, I would say, is very ahead of the rest of maybe many of the other countries and institutions in those countries, in that they have created partnerships early with universities and with corporations here in the United States. What about within India itself? What is IIT doing different within India to make life better for the student that's coming out that is a part of that 50% population that's under the age of 25?
Well, that is a big challenge, and you might have seen recent reports that one of the things that they are planning to do is get rid of what they call the joint entrance exam. And there has been a lot of criticism. Narayan Murthy made a statement which has been carried in the press a lot at the conference, which talks about how the quality of the average IIT graduate now is not that good. Okay, and the reason is because a lot of the people have started to game the system. So the IITs are going through a process where they're re-examining the whole admissions process and how they can keep the level of education to international standards. So and there's a lot of activity within the IITs for doing things that are specific to India's requirements.
That's what I'm wondering about, because I read many articles about how these institutions in India, like IIT, are starting to look at GMATs and otherwise standardized tests that are used globally. But, you know, that's great if you're looking for the student base to then go out and be in the world. But if you want to retain that back within India, how do you foster that growth within India? So what would be an example?
Well, the local economy in India, for example, is crying out for certain types of skills. So the IIT alumni started something for the IITians for ITI, which is the Industrial Training Institutes. So, for example, if Ford Motor were to set up a plant in India, they can find all the engineers they want, but they can't find a good welder. So it's a matter of how you sort of juggle national priorities. Let's take the United States. Okay, there has been a significant importance placed on the liberal arts, and now in the recent past they've started talking about STEM education. Okay, science, technology, engineering, and math. And in order for the educational systems to maintain the high level of education that we've had in the United States, if you want more students to go into research programs, it starts in kindergarten.
Wow.
So it's an ecosystem. So I think the leadership, tying it back to what we were talking about earlier, the leadership needs to recognize that and come up with policies and procedures that will allow us in the long run to create a climate for local enterprise to flourish. It doesn't happen if you squelch capital. It doesn't happen if you only promote soft services, okay, or entitlement programs. It has to come by creating an environment for entrepreneurship to flourish. And that's where I think this next election is going to be very interesting.
Well, here's another story from BBC News that also says this is happening in India. You know, forever India was the call center hub, and we've seen shows even on TV that kind of make fun of the Indian call center. But that phenomenon, I think, might be short-lived. This article, India's call center growth stalls, clearly points to the fact that in many cases India is no longer the world's biggest outsourcing hub for call centers, and some British and American companies are moving operations back home because they simply don't want to deal with the headaches, and because it's becoming more and more expensive to maintain these call centers overseas. And plus you have a lot of staff that come in and out, so they have to retrain each time that the staff has to come in. Those are all logistical headaches that a lot of these call centers were prepared to face when the economy was good here. But now that the economy is suffering here, they don't have the dollars left to do that kind of investment overseas either. So I think that it's funny how the contraction of the economy also seems to reduce globalization instead of expand it. We're not trying to chase the dollar in other countries. We're actually trying to bring that back to some degree.
And if you look at what's happening with the Indian companies like Wipro and Tata's and Infosys and some of the bigger companies, they are starting to open large centers here in the United States, which is a very interesting reverse.
It's a complete shift.
Absolutely. And in fact, when you go into the hinterland, so for example, if you go to Southern Virginia, you see that they are within range of some very large universities, so you have a very rich talent pool available in Southern Virginia. Highly educated, and the state offers you a lot of incentives to locate in those hub zones, if you will. And a lot of companies are taking advantage of that. One of the largest packaging companies in Southern Virginia is owned by an Indian entity.
I did not know that.
So if you go to the Virginia Economic Development's website, you will see that kind of activity is going on, where a lot of Indian companies are starting to manufacture here in the United States as well.
That, I think, is a very interesting trend.
So moving on, here's a very interesting article that came in the Washington Post. And it's talking about how we are importing shoppers.
Wait a minute, you can import goods and services, you're importing shoppers.
Well, according to this article, they are expecting 1.3 million jobs to be created at $859 billion in purchases made by consumers from cash-rich countries like China, India, and Brazil.
Isn't that a wonderful statement? Cash-rich countries like India, China, and Brazil.
We've come a long way there. So, for example, in this article, they talk about how a gentleman from China talks about buying Adidas sneakers for $25 at a U.S. outlet mall. And he says for that price in China, you can't even buy counterfeits. So there's a wonderful example of someone from China who comes to the United States to buy U.S. products.
And it's basically shopping tourism.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's creating jobs and $800 billion worth of potential, purchases made by these consumers. So it's fascinating how it's all coming together.
And speaking of shopping, folks, this was the funniest thing I've read in quite some time. This appeared in the New York Times new website called India Inc. I encourage you to check it out because they have a lot of very interesting articles there. This is from Chennai, the sari with a phone pocket. I know maybe you can't relate to this, but when I have to wear a sari sometimes, it's a pain to carry a purse because the sari really wasn't designed for a big, heavy purse to go with it. But of course, you can't live without your cell phone. So what are you to do when you have to wear a sari and you have to carry your cell phone? Well, the folks in Chennai got smart. They created the pocket sari. This is a sari that actually has an embroidered, very pretty looking pocket where you can stash your cell phone and probably your lipstick and your wallet as well. And it seems to be catching on, folks. You can buy one of these saris for 4,000 rupees, and they were quite the sensation when they were first introduced by the popular Sri Kumaran stores in Chennai. And of course, now it's